Hey, what's up guys, it's Oakley, and I am back bringing you some Thrones of Britannia campaign gameplay. This time around, we are going to be allowed to show you some of the Viking Sea Kings. So I want to show you that. Before we've done some of the Vikings from the Great Heathen Army, looking at Northumbria, some more of the settled Vikings, whereas the Viking Sea Kings are going to be more wild in their nature, more focused on the Viking activities that you would expect, the raiding, trading, and pillaging. So you have two available to you. One, Dyflin, which is going to be essentially, you know, the city of Dublin around here in Ireland. And so you have the Ireland and the Isle of Man. And then the other one, Sudrair, which is going to be up in northern Scotland. So interesting one. I decided to play as Dublin. Both of them here, as you see I can toggle, are going to share cultural features. So the first is going to be expeditions. So essentially what this is the more battles you do, etc., the more you can kind of rank up and unlock this expedition, which is then going to be sent over into the eastern reaches or the northern reaches. So it's kind of like an off-map series of events that you can trigger, which is pretty cool. The next one that you can do is going to be tribute, where you're trying to get other kingdoms to pay homage to you and submit to you. So that's something faction-wide. You'll get bonuses. And then generally speaking, for both of these, you get immunity while at sea from attrition. And that's going to be very important, because one of the main issues I had as Northumbria is I didn't really feel like the Vikings. I couldn't make full use of my longship. I couldn't travel long distances. It took forever to get down south, whereas this faction can take advantage of the deep sea, which really gives you a speed boost. And then on top of that, you don't suffer any attrition. So I found as this faction, this bonus really helped me out with getting around. Next, we can take a look at some of the other features here. Sudrair here. Field of assembly, an assembly of free men and lawmakers who meet to make decisions, send their army on missions. A little different features, more supplies and strong axes. Didn't get too much experience on how this field assembly plays out, but in terms of Dyflin, I played a fair amount with the slave trade, and this was a cool feature. And then you get reduced construction costs. As opposed to talking about this, let's go ahead and load one of my campaigns here so I can show you what this looks like in action. So let's go ahead and pop in on Dyflin. Alright, we have loaded this up, so let me go ahead and show you kind of what's been going on with my campaign. So you do start down here around Dublin. You have this relatively secure area, and then you also start with control of the Isle of Man, a nice kind of vantage point for raiding in all directions. And you can choose to do a couple different things. One, you can start to like raid, harass, and go to general war with Ireland, perhaps try and get your supremacy here, conquer the Isle, before then turning to the east. What I've done in my campaign is kind of get friendly relations with my immediate neighbors, and then force the others to trade with me and give me homage. So I've been kind of nestled rather heavily here with pretty good garrison investments and a lot of farms. So kind of just securing myself. And then what you can see here, sending fleets and armies to ravage, I guess, the western coast of the main British Isles here. And yeah, so I've been launching raids on all the exposed settlements. A lot of them are pretty pissed off with me, but I've been doing a lot of the raiding to take up, you know, the various specific faction mechanics that I have in terms of the tribute, in terms of the expeditions and slavery. So let's go ahead and show you kind of what that looks like. So the main features are going to be here. Well, I guess let's talk about War Fervor. So one of the main things that you'll be getting quite readily if you do a lot of raiding here is very high War Fervor. So a lot of this owed to my battles, and even peace treaties back at home. So I found that this was very easy to buff up. I found that in general, Dublin was much easier in terms of getting started and having a lot of fun compared to Northumbria. Northumbria, I was getting pummeled by loyalty issues. It was a very slow grind of strategically expanding, whereas Dublin, you're pretty comfortable in your position here, and then you're going to be the one kind of throwing punches when you raid, with not many forces able to counterpunch. If you do see an army coming at you, you just pull on out of there and raid the next neighbor. So I felt overall much more Viking in my experience, and I had a lot of fun with this one. So yeah, perhaps more of an easy start, but still very historically accurate and I thought fun. So okay, that's going to be War Fervor. The next one is going to be this tribute. So essentially what tribute does is, through battles or through forcing, you know, other factions to give you payments, what you can do is you can increase this tribute, and essentially it's just a meter. The higher and higher it goes, the more influence you get, the more farm production and market value you get. So you want to try and increase this. I thought this was really awesome. It rewards you for getting battles and raids, but then also it does play into the way you do your diplomacy. So I found a lot of the times I was trying to angle my diplomatic relations back in Ireland, to try and get them to force them to pay me. So what I would do is offer tokens of friendship or military alliances or wage war on their enemies, all to try and get them, in exchange for money payments to me. And that's why you're seeing kind of the diplomacy payments being at 20. And so yeah, that kind of help increase my tribute value here. So I thought that was really cool, the way it kind of rewarded your battles and the way you handle diplomacy. So I was very happy with both of these features. Next one over is going to be your expedition. So expedition is quite interesting. I wasn't quite sure how it played out at first, but I've kind of gotten an inkling for it. So essentially, same thing. You kind of tech it up over time. You earn points and accrue points by doing various things. So blockades, sacks, raids, etc. So you can see me doing a lot of those across the board. And essentially, once you get up to 50, you can launch an expedition. And I wasn't quite sure what the expedition was. It basically seemed like, okay, the boats are ready. Let's send them. And I thought what it would do would be to spawn an actual army. But instead, what it does is a series of essentially campaign decisions that pop up. And so what you do is you choose what direction do you want to send your fleet, and then after that you wait a couple turns and it's like, okay, the fleet has arrived at its location. Do you want to land here, or do you want to keep going, or do you want to return home? And then the next step after that, so for instance in my campaign I decided to go east. A couple turns later it turns out I engaged with the Rus, and what I could do is continue going eastwards. And then, I had more decisions. I presume if I keep going east, eventually I'll get all the way to Byzantium. But what I decided to do in my campaign was to trade with the Rus. So I thought that was a really cool dynamic way to interact outside the map. It was one of my main gripes that I had as Northumbria, that I wasn't really engaging with the world abroad. And I thought that awesome series of events, getting trickling news back from the Vikings, was really cool. So I'm definitely a proponent of this expedition. Again, I haven't quite seen the payoff for it, but it seemed like a really cool addition, as opposed to just spawning an army and then giving you an additional like a WA force that trails you. No, this was something off the map that allowed you to do some pretty interesting stuff. I would love to see what the payoff of this is. I haven't quite gotten to it yet, and so I'm reserving a little bit of judgment, but thus far it was pretty unique. I really like this idea. And then lastly, the last mechanic is going to be the slave trade. So this is something, again, I griped about before. And yeah, glad to see it's in here. Basically what happens is the more you raid, assault, and engage in battles, you can accrue slaves. So in here I have 2,204. And basically every turn I'm going to be selling off slaves. So at this point, because of this number of slaves, I can get 400 gold in income per turn. So that's about, a third, a little under a third of my income is from slaves. But the more you boost this up, the more income you get from slaves. So again, incentivizing, raiding, sacking, pillaging, etc. So I really like how these all come into conjunction. So I do have to say that a lot of this, combined with kind of the play style in general of the Viking Sea Kings, really scratched my itch for what it felt like to be the Vikings, as well as some of the cool rosters that it did have a lot more axes than the other forces, and I felt like these could really melt through enemy shield walls, etc. So I do have to say that my main concerns with not feeling like the Vikings was definitely sated with the Viking Sea Kings, so that is a great benefit. My last kind of standing complaint that I had against CA was, hey, with the longship, it felt like, it wasn't a longship. How could I raid up rivers? And when I made a post on the subreddit, CA did come back with an answer, and what they said is that they did try and implement navigable rivers, and they ran into some issues. The first one was that, hey, they found that, if you were able to move up a river and two fleets met, it would force you to do a battle on the river, and they weren't quite prepared to have river battles with ships because it's just such a small space, it wouldn't have been fun. I think that's kind of a BS answer, because they could easily resolve it with kind of a land battle on the side of the river, and that's plausible enough. I don't get that. My guess is it's probably something to do with, the pathfinding and the ability of the AI to react to that new terrain feature that CA just didn't have the resources or the ability to grasp it or solve it. So yeah, I don't quite accept their official answer, but I'm glad to hear that they actually did try it, and they did tell me that they came up with a compromise, which I didn't quite notice at first. And what they did come up with is, in a lot of places, so for instance, York here, York is not on the ocean. The ocean does not extend all the way up here. But what they did is, in order to make York accessible by ships, they broadened this river and essentially turned it into a deep kind of channel. So that's what you're going to be seeing across the maps, is a lot of these channels in various areas allowing you to go inland aren't actually there geographically, but they've been kind of enlarged to allow ships to sneak in and actually raid a little bit inland. So I thought that was a fair compromise. Still doesn't get me to where I want to, to be able to go all the way down the river and raid very far inland, but this is a decent compromise, I found. So yeah, overall, those are my impressions of the campaign. It is definitely giving me a kind of a rosier and more appreciable look at Thrones of Britannia. It does check a couple more boxes, but still, I'm not quite sure how the replayability is going to be at the end of the day. So we'll have to wait and see. And I do have a separate video on the battles themselves. CA, again, has done some improvements, and I'll be discussing those in a separate video. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'm starting to warm up to the title. So this is some good news. We'll have to wait and see more from CA. But thus far, heading in the right direction. So that's it for this quick updated report. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.